They said the American girl was a spy, but I gave her rice and whispered, "You're just a child." The world held its breath, a collective gasp choked by the smoke of burning cities and the metallic tang of fear. The Second World War was not merely a conflict of nations. It was a crucible that tested the very essence of humanity, forging a landscape of unimaginable brutality, where the lines between good and evil blurred into a permanent, smudged gray. Yet within this overwhelming darkness, flickers of an inextinguishable light persisted. This is not a story of grand battles or strategic victories, nor is it a chronicle of atrocities, though both are undeniably part of the tapestry. Instead, it is an intimate exploration, a tender unearthing of moments that defy the logic of war, instances where the instinct to harm was overridden by a more profound, more ancient impulse: compassion. We often speak of war in terms of armies clashing, of ideologies warring, of nations vying for dominance. We see the maps, the casualty counts, the political machinations, but the true war, the one that raged within the hearts of millions, was a silent, often unseen, struggle against the dehumanizing forces that sought to strip away our shared humanity. It was a battle fought not with tanks and planes, but with whispered words, shared rations, and the quiet courage to see the other not as an enemy, but as a fellow human being caught in the same storm. This script delves into those rare, precious moments when, on opposing sides of a global conflict, individuals chose empathy over animosity, offering a gesture of kindness that echoed far beyond the battlefield. Our journey begins with a stark reality: the widespread propaganda that painted entire populations as monstrous, as irredeemable enemies. This systematic dehumanization was a crucial tool of war, designed to quell dissent, to embolden soldiers to commit acts they might otherwise find unthinkable, and to ensure the public's unwavering support for the brutal machinery of conflict. It created a psychological chasm, a vast and terrifying distance that seemed impossible to bridge. The enemy was not just an opponent. They were a caricature of evil, a faceless threat that needed to be eradicated. Yet, the human spirit, in its most resilient form, refused to be entirely extinguished by this manufactured hatred. This narrative will explore the profound paradox of war, how in the very heart of destruction, acts of extraordinary grace can emerge. We will witness how, amidst the chaos and the terror, individuals found the strength to extend a hand of fellowship, to offer solace, to recognize the shared pain and vulnerability that bound them to those they were ostensibly meant to destroy. These are not tales of soldiers laying down arms en masse, but of singular, potent acts of defiance against the prevailing narrative of hate. They are the quiet revolutions that occurred in foxholes, in bombed-out farmhouses, in prisoner-of-war camps, and in the shadowed corners of occupied cities. The story of the American girl, branded a spy, and the soldier who offered her rice and a whisper of reassurance is not an isolated incident. It is a microcosm of a larger, often overlooked truth, that the capacity for kindness is an indelible part of the human condition, even when pushed to its absolute limits. We will peel back the layers of historical accounts, personal testimonies, and forgotten letters to reveal these resonant echoes of humanity. This is an invitation to look beyond the headlines and the statistics, to connect with the individual stories that remind us that even in the darkest of times, the light of compassion can, and indeed does, survive. Our exploration is not just about the past. It is about understanding the enduring power of empathy, a force that has the potential to heal and transform, even decades after the final shots were fired. The chill of a late autumn evening in 1944 had settled over the Ardennes, a biting precursor to the brutal winter that would soon engulf the European front. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the ever-present acrid perfume of gunpowder. Beneath a sky the color of bruised pewter, the landscape was a brutal testament to the war's relentless march. Scarred trees, shell-pocked fields, and the skeletal remains of farmhouses stood as silent witnesses to the recent passage of mechanized death. In the dense, unforgiving forests, shadows stretched long and distorted, transforming familiar shapes into menacing specters. Every rustle of leaves, every distant crack of a rifle, every mournful cry of the wind through the skeletal branches heightened the pervasive sense of dread. Here, amidst the mud and the blood, The human spirit was subjected to its most extreme tests. Soldiers, boys really, were thrust into a reality where survival often meant suppressing their innate sense of morality, where the enemy was a faceless entity to be neutralized, a target to be eliminated. Propaganda had done its work, painting vivid pictures of monstrous foes, justifying the unimaginable violence that was now commonplace. The psychological distance created by this narrative was vast, a chasm seemingly impossible to bridge. Fear was a constant companion, a gnawing presence that whispered doubts and amplified every perceived threat. The very air seemed to vibrate with tension, a coiled spring ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Yet, within this suffocating atmosphere of fear and animosity, a different kind of story was being written, not in official dispatches or military communiques, but in the quiet, unrecorded moments between the thunder of artillery. It was a narrative of the unexpected, of the impossible kindness that bloomed in the most barren of soils. These were not acts of surrender, nor were they strategic maneuvers. They were spontaneous, often solitary gestures, born from a sudden visceral recognition of shared humanity. A recognition that the enemy was not a concept, but a person, a being capable of suffering, fear, and perhaps even a flicker of the same longing for peace that resided within their own weary hearts. The woman, barely more than a girl, had been caught behind enemy lines. Her story, pieced together later, spoke of a desperate attempt to reach Allied forces, a perilous journey through a landscape that offered no sanctuary. Her accent, her unfamiliar uniform, her youthful, terrified eyes, all marked her as an outsider, a potential threat in a world where trust was a luxury few could afford. The soldier who found her was German, weary from months of relentless fighting, his own existence a precarious balance between duty and a deep, buried weariness of the endless bloodshed. He had been trained to see her as an enemy, an operative, a spy. His orders were clear: apprehend, interrogate, neutralize. But as he looked at her, huddled and trembling, the carefully constructed walls of his training began to crumble. He saw not the propaganda-fueled caricature of an enemy operative, but a young woman, alone, terrified, and profoundly vulnerable. The rice, a meager but precious commodity in the harsh conditions of the front, was not a strategic asset or a ration to be hoarded. It was sustenance, a basic human need, and in that moment, his instinct to preserve life, a primal force that transcended the brutal logic of war, took precedence. The hushed whisper, the simple phrase, "You're just a child," was an acknowledgement, a profound act of seeing beyond the uniform, beyond the label of enemy, to the shared, fragile core of their humanity. This single act, seemingly small against the backdrop of a global conflagration, serves as our entry point. It is a powerful testament to the enduring strength of empathy, a force that can penetrate even the deepest trenches of conflict. It reminds us that the human capacity for kindness is not a casualty of war, but a resilient ember that can be fanned into a flame, illuminating the darkest corners of our history and offering a profound message of hope that resonates to this day. The chilling wind whipped through the skeletal remains of what was once a quaint French village, its mournful howl echoing the emptiness left by conflict. Rubble choked the narrow streets, and the pervasive scent of damp concrete and lingering smoke hung heavy in the air. It was late 1944, and the relentless tide of war had receded, leaving behind a landscape of desolation, a canvas of shattered lives. Amidst this ruin, a small group of German soldiers, weary and gaunt, moved with a practiced, grim efficiency. Their faces, etched with the harsh realities of the Eastern Front, held a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. It was a deep-seated fatigue of the soul. Among them was Corporal Klaus Richter, a man whose uniform concealed a heart that still remembered the quiet rhythms of a life before the war. He had seen too much, endured too much to fully embrace the dehumanizing rhetoric that fueled the conflict. While the war demanded obedience and the suppression of individual conscience, Klaus found himself increasingly drawn to the subtle acts of defiance that kept his own humanity intact. He had witnessed the chilling effectiveness of propaganda, how it could twist perceptions, transforming fellow human beings into monstrous caricatures. He understood the psychological imperative to dehumanize the enemy. but his own experiences had taught him the profound danger of such a path. His unit had been tasked with securing a recently liberated town, a place where the echoes of occupation still lingered in the hushed silence of its remaining inhabitants. The initial sweep revealed a scene of utter devastation, but as they ventured deeper into the ravaged buildings, a flicker of movement caught Klaus's eye. Hidden within the shadowed alcove of a bombed-out bakery, a young woman, her face smudged with dirt and fear, clutched a small bundle to her chest. Her eyes, wide and wild, darted between Klaus and his comrades, anticipating the worst. She was clearly not a combatant, her presence in this desolate place a testament to some desperate act of survival. The immediate reaction from some of his fellow soldiers was suspicion, a reflex honed by years of paranoia and ingrained hostility. The whispers began, fueled by the prevailing narrative. She must be a spy, a saboteur, someone posing a threat. The inherent danger of her presence, regardless of her intent, was amplified by the constant pressure and the ever-present fear of betrayal. Klaus, however, saw something else in her wide, terrified eyes. He saw not a faceless enemy, but a reflection of the same fear and desperation he had witnessed countless times in the eyes of his own people caught in the crossfire. He saw a young woman, alone, caught in the devastating machinery of war, her survival hanging by a thread. He remembered the stories his mother used to tell him, tales of shared meals and acts of kindness that transcended village rivalries. He recalled the inherent human drive to nurture, to protect the vulnerable, a drive that seemed to grow stronger in the face of overwhelming adversity. In that moment, the carefully constructed barriers of enemy status began to dissolve. The label of spy seemed a hollow accusation against the raw, undeniable reality of her fear. The instinct to protect, to offer solace, surged within him, a powerful countercurrent to the tide of war. He understood that the true battle was not just on the front lines, but within the hearts of individuals, a constant struggle to preserve their humanity against the forces that sought to extinguish it. He stepped forward, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening, a stark contrast to the tense posture of his companions. He saw the meager contents of her bundle, a few scraps of food, a testament to her desperate resourcefulness. He reached into his own pack, his movements deliberate, and withdrew a portion of his own rations, a small bag of rice, a staple that represented not just sustenance, but a symbol of normalcy in a world turned upside down. He extended it towards her, his gaze steady and reassuring. The words that followed, spoken in a low, almost inaudible tone, were not a command nor a threat, but a whispered acknowledgement of her shared humanity. They said the American girl was a spy, he murmured, his voice barely audible above the wind. But I gave her rice and whispered, "You're just a child." This simple act, this quiet defiance of the war's narrative, was a profound moment of connection, a testament to the enduring power of empathy to pierce through even the darkest of human conflicts. The weight of the world's conflict pressed down, a suffocating blanket of fear and uncertainty. In the desolate landscape of war-torn Europe, where the very air seemed to vibrate with the echoes of destruction, humanity itself felt like a forgotten relic. Yet, beneath the veneer of brutality and the relentless march of armies, a different kind of struggle was being waged, an internal battle for the preservation of the soul. This was the war fought not with bullets and bombs, but with whispered words, shared glances, and the quiet courage to see the humanity in the eyes of an enemy. It was in these fleeting, often unrecorded moments that the true resilience of the human spirit was revealed, a testament to the enduring power of compassion. Klaus Richter, the German corporal, found himself standing at a precipice, a moral crossroads born from the stark realities of his wartime existence. He had witnessed the dehumanizing effects of propaganda firsthand, the insidious way it could warp perceptions, turning fellow human beings into abstract threats, mere targets to be eliminated. He understood the strategic necessity of such narratives, how they served to fuel the war machine and justify the unthinkable. But his own experiences on the Eastern Front had etched a different truth onto his soul, the profound danger of forgetting the individual, of erasing the shared humanity that bound all people together. The encounter with the young American woman, suspected of being a spy, had been a pivotal moment. Her fear, raw and palpable, had cut through the hardened shell he had painstakingly built around himself. It was a mirror reflecting his own vulnerability, his own desperate yearning for a world free from the shadow of war. In that moment, the official labels, the propaganda-fueled accusations, seemed to dissolve. He saw not a spy, but a child, a terrified soul adrift in the storm of conflict. The act of offering her rice, a simple gesture of sustenance, was more than just an act of charity. It was a profound act of defiance against the prevailing narrative of hate. His whisper, "You're just a child," was a silent acknowledgement of a shared vulnerability, a recognition that the artificial barriers erected by war could not entirely extinguish the fundamental human connection. This act, born from a deep-seated empathy, was a radical departure from the expected response. It was a moment where instinct trumped indoctrination, where the primal urge to protect superseded the dictates of duty. The shared rice, a symbol of basic human need, became a bridge across the chasm of animosity, a quiet testament to the fact that, even in the heart of conflict, compassion could find a way to bloom. This narrative is not about grand pronouncements or sweeping gestures of peace. It is about the quiet revolutions that occurred in the hearts of individuals, the small acts of kindness that defied the logic of war. It is about exploring the psychological and ethical dimensions of empathy in extreme circumstances. The scientific understanding of altruism suggests that even in the face of extreme stress and danger, the capacity for pro-social behavior can persist. This phenomenon is often attributed to factors such as a strong moral compass, a deep-seated sense of empathy, and the influence of personal values that transcend the immediate context of conflict. Klaus's act was a profound reflection of this. He was not a pacifist, nor was he a traitor. He was a soldier caught in the grim reality of war, yet he retained the capacity to recognize and respond to the suffering of another human being. This internal conflict, the tension between the demands of war and the innate human inclination towards compassion, is a central theme that we will explore. His decision to offer aid, knowing the potential risks, speaks volumes about his character and the enduring power of his moral convictions. It was a choice that prioritized a universal human value over the dictates of wartime expediency. The rice, a simple staple, became a potent symbol. It represented not just nourishment, but the shared vulnerability of human existence. In a world where resources were scarce and survival was a daily struggle, sharing such a basic necessity was an act of extraordinary generosity. It was a silent declaration that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, the instinct to connect and to offer solace could prevail. This act of empathy, though small in the grand scheme of the war, was a powerful affirmation of humanity's enduring capacity for good. It was a seed of hope planted in the barren soil of conflict, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of kindness could still shine through. The aftermath of Klaus's encounter with the young American woman was not a dramatic shift in the course of the war, but a subtle, yet profound internal transformation. The memory of her wide, terrified eyes and the quiet act of sharing his rations became a touchstone for Klaus, a reminder of the humanity that war sought to erase. He carried this memory with him through the remaining months of the conflict, a silent testament to the power of empathy in the face of overwhelming brutality. It was a secret he held close, a private rebellion against the dehumanizing forces that threatened to consume him. The war raged on, a relentless storm of destruction that claimed millions of lives and scarred the landscape of Europe. The propaganda machines on both sides continued their grim work, painting enemies as monsters, fueling hatred and justifying the bloodshed. Yet for Klaus, the image of the young woman, her fear momentarily eased by a simple act of kindness, remained a potent counter-narrative. It was a reminder that beneath the uniforms and the battle lines, there were individuals, each with their own hopes, fears, and capacity for both good and evil. This understanding, hard-won through personal experience, offered a glimmer of hope in the pervasive darkness. The psychological impact of such encounters is significant. While war often fosters an environment where empathy is suppressed, research suggests that these moments of connection can have a lasting effect on individuals. They can serve as anchors, preventing complete moral corrosion and providing a foundation for rebuilding one's sense of self and one's understanding of the world after the conflict has ended. Klaus's experience illustrates how a single act of compassion, even one shrouded in secrecy and risk, can have a profound and enduring impact on the individual who performs it, offering a sense of moral grounding amidst chaos. The story of the young American woman and the German corporal is not unique. Throughout the Second World War, countless similar instances occurred, often undocumented, lost to the annals of history. These were the moments when soldiers, on both sides, chose to see the human in the enemy. They were the acts of mercy shown to prisoners of war, the shared cigarettes between opposing sentries, the warnings given to civilians about impending bombardments, the clandestine sharing of food and medical supplies. These were not acts of betrayal, but acts of profound humanity, a quiet assertion that the bonds of shared existence were stronger than the divisions of war. The act of giving rice was a small gesture, almost insignificant against the backdrop of global conflict. Yet, it was precisely these small personal acts that held the power to affirm life in the face of death. It was a recognition that the enemy was not an abstract concept, but a person, a human being deserving of basic dignity. This realization, however fleeting, offered a profound counterpoint to the prevailing narrative of hatred and dehumanization. It was a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, its innate capacity for compassion, even in the most dire circumstances. The consequences of such acts were not always immediate or visible, but they represented a silent internal victory for humanity. The war eventually ended, leaving behind a world irrevocably changed, a landscape scarred by loss and devastation. For Klaus Richter, the memory of the young American woman and the shared rice remained a guiding light. It was a reminder that, even in the darkest of times, the potential for kindness and understanding persisted. This profound experience shaped his post-war life, influencing his interactions and his worldview. He understood, perhaps more than most, the fragile nature of peace and the vital importance of empathy in fostering reconciliation and preventing future conflicts. The echoes of these acts of compassion, though often silent, reverberated through the lives of those who experienced them. They offered a crucial counterpoint to the pervasive narratives of hatred and violence that defined the war. While the official histories often focus on battles and political strategies, these personal stories reveal a deeper, more intimate truth about the human condition. They highlight the enduring capacity for empathy and the profound impact of seemingly small gestures of kindness. Klaus's internal struggle was a microcosm of the broader human experience during wartime. The constant tension between duty and conscience, between the dehumanizing pressures of conflict and the innate human desire for connection, defined the lives of millions. His decision to offer aid, despite the risks, was a powerful affirmation of his own moral compass. It was a choice that prioritized empathy over animosity, a quiet act of rebellion against the prevailing tide of hatred. This internal victory, though unseen by most, was a profound testament to his enduring humanity. The shared rice, a simple yet potent symbol, represented more than just sustenance. It was a gesture of solidarity, a silent acknowledgement of shared vulnerability. In a world where scarcity and suffering were rampant, such an act was an extraordinary display of generosity. It was a quiet defiance of the war's narrative, a powerful reminder that even amidst the brutality, the instinct to connect and to offer solace could prevail. This act, though seemingly small, held immense significance, offering a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. The memory of this encounter became a cornerstone of Klaus's post-war life. It informed his interactions, his understanding of human nature, and his commitment to fostering peace. He understood that the true cost of war was not just measured in lives lost or cities destroyed, but in the erosion of humanity itself. His experience served as a stark reminder of the importance of empathy, a vital ingredient for healing and reconciliation. He became a quiet advocate for understanding, a living testament to the fact that even in the most dire of circumstances, the capacity for kindness could endure. The war had ended, but its scars remained, etched not only on the physical landscape, but deep within the hearts of those who had lived through it. For Klaus Richter, the memory of the young American woman and the shared rice was not a fleeting moment, but a guiding light, a constant reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. He carried this memory as a silent testament to the fact that even in the darkest of times, the capacity for empathy and compassion could prevail. It was a profound truth that shaped his post-war life, influencing his interactions and his understanding of the world. He understood the insidious power of propaganda, the way it could twist perceptions and fuel hatred. He had seen firsthand how easily individuals could be reduced to faceless enemies, their humanity erased in the name of conflict. But his encounter with the young woman had offered a powerful counter-narrative. It was a visceral reminder that beneath the uniforms and the battle lines, there were individuals, each with their own hopes, fears, and a shared vulnerability that transcended the divisions of war. This realization was a crucial element in his journey towards healing and reconciliation. The shared rice, a simple act of sustenance, had become a potent symbol. It represented not just nourishment, but a profound acknowledgement of shared humanity. In a world where scarcity and suffering were rampant, such a gesture was an extraordinary act of generosity. It was a quiet defiance of the war's narrative, a powerful assertion that even amidst the brutality, the instinct to connect and to offer solace could prevail. This act, though seemingly small, held immense significance, offering a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. It was a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, its innate capacity for kindness. The echoes of these acts of compassion, though often lost to the grand narratives of history, resonated deeply within the lives of those who experienced them. They offered a crucial counterpoint to the pervasive narratives of hatred and violence that defined the war. While official histories often focus on battles and political strategies, these personal stories reveal a deeper, more intimate truth about the human condition. They highlight the enduring capacity for empathy and the profound impact of seemingly small gestures of kindness. Klaus's life became a living embodiment of this truth, a testament to the fact that even in the face of unimaginable adversity, humanity could endure. The world had been reshaped by conflict, its landscapes scarred, its populations traumatized. Yet within this profound devastation, a persistent ember of hope glowed. The story of Klaus Richter and the young American woman was not an anomaly, but an echo of countless similar moments, whispers of humanity that rose above the din of war. These were the acts that defied the logic of conflict, the moments when empathy triumphed over animosity, when the shared vulnerability of being human transcended the imposed divisions of enemy and ally. Klaus's act of offering rice was more than just a gesture of kindness. It was a profound act of recognition. In seeing the young woman not as a spy, but as a child, he acknowledged her inherent worth, her fundamental humanity. This was a radical act in a world that had been systematically conditioned to erase such distinctions. It was a silent rebellion against the dehumanizing forces of war, a powerful affirmation of the enduring capacity for compassion that resides within us all. The rice itself, a symbol of basic sustenance, became a bridge, a tangible connection between two souls caught in the same devastating storm. The psychological impact of such moments cannot be overstated. In the brutal crucible of war, where survival often demanded the suppression of empathy, these acts served as vital anchors to one's humanity. They were affirmations that the innate human drive for connection and kindness could not be entirely extinguished. For Klaus, this memory became a source of strength, a quiet testament to the moral resilience that allowed him to navigate the post-war world with a deeper understanding of human nature. He carried the weight of his experiences, but also the light of this profound encounter. The legacy of these hidden acts of compassion is a powerful one. They remind us that even in the bleakest of circumstances, the human spirit possesses an extraordinary capacity for grace. They challenge the notion that war inevitably leads to the complete erosion of morality, revealing instead a complex interplay between brutality and benevolence. The stories like that of Klaus and the young woman serve as vital counter-narratives, urging us to look beyond the grand strategies and the casualty counts to the intimate personal moments where true humanity was preserved. As we move forward, the echoes of these acts of empathy continue to resonate. They are not merely historical footnotes, but potent reminders of our shared humanity. The war may have ended, but the lessons learned, the quiet acts of kindness that defied the darkness, offer a timeless message of hope. They teach us that even in the deepest trenches, even amidst the most brutal of conflicts, the light of compassion can survive, a testament to the enduring strength of the human heart. This enduring light, this persistent echo of kindness, is what ultimately allows us to rebuild, to reconcile, and to move forward, carrying the profound understanding that kindness doesn't end wars, but it survives them. The relentless march of war often compels individuals into a state of heightened vigilance, a perpetual awareness of potential threats that can warp perception and foster deep-seated mistrust. This constant state of alert, a product of intense psychological pressure, can make it incredibly difficult to discern genuine danger from imagined peril, especially when confronted by someone from the opposing side. The ingrained societal narratives, amplified by wartime propaganda, further exacerbate this condition, creating a mental landscape where every stranger from the other faction is presumed to be an adversary, a potential saboteur, or spy. Consider the psychological phenomenon of in-group bias, a powerful cognitive tendency that favors one's own group over others. During wartime, this bias is amplified to an extreme degree. Soldiers are conditioned to view those outside their immediate unit or nationality with suspicion, their actions interpreted through a lens of inherent hostility. This makes spontaneous acts of altruism towards perceived enemies exceptionally rare and therefore profoundly significant. They represent a conscious override of deeply ingrained psychological mechanisms, a deliberate choice to prioritize a shared humanity over group affiliation. The subtle art of deception, a constant undercurrent in wartime espionage, further complicates these interactions. The very presence of an individual behind enemy lines, particularly one with the potential to gather intelligence, immediately raises red flags. Every action, every word, every glance can be scrutinized for hidden meaning, for evidence of duplicity. This creates an environment where genuine acts of compassion can be misconstrued, where a simple offering of aid might be viewed as a calculated ploy to gain trust or access vital information. The inherent ambiguity of such situations places an immense burden on the individual attempting to act with empathy, forcing them to navigate a minefield of potential misinterpretations. Furthermore, the ethical frameworks that guide societal behavior are often suspended or drastically altered during wartime. The rules of engagement, the accepted norms of interaction, are rewritten by the exigencies of conflict. What would be considered a commendable act of kindness in peacetime might be viewed as a dangerous act of treason during wartime. This ethical ambiguity adds another layer of complexity to instances of inter-enemy compassion. The individuals who choose to act with empathy are not only risking their own safety, but also defying the established moral order of their wartime society, making their choices even more courageous and noteworthy. Now, consider how this applies when you face a situation where the stakes are incredibly high and the lines between friend and foe are deliberately blurred. Imagine being a soldier, exhausted, on edge, and presented with someone who fits the profile of a threat. Perhaps their accent is unfamiliar, their clothing out of place, their demeanor anxious. The ingrained instinct, reinforced by countless hours of training and propaganda, is to suspect, to apprehend, to neutralize. It is a survival mechanism honed by the brutal realities of conflict. Conversely, the act of offering aid, as Klaus did, requires a profound internal shift. It necessitates a deliberate stepping back from the immediate threat assessment, a conscious effort to access a deeper, more fundamental layer of human connection. It involves recognizing the shared vulnerability that lies beneath the uniforms and the labels. This requires immense personal fortitude, a willingness to challenge one's own ingrained perceptions and the prevailing societal narrative. It is in these moments of individual defiance against the collective momentum of animosity that the true strength of the human spirit is revealed, a quiet testament to the power of empathy to endure even in the most unforgiving environments. This profound internal recalibration, the deliberate choice to see a person rather than an enemy, is what elevates such acts from simple kindness to acts of profound moral courage. The pervasive atmosphere of wartime espionage created a unique psychological landscape, one where the very act of discerning genuine threat from fabricated peril became a constant, exhausting battle. This environment fostered a deep-seated suspicion, a learned reflex to interpret every unfamiliar face or hesitant gesture through the prism of potential subterfuge. The constant barrage of propaganda, meticulously crafted to demonize the enemy, reinforced this outlook, effectively painting entire populations as monolithic entities of malice. Consequently, the capacity for genuine human connection, for recognizing shared vulnerabilities, was systematically suppressed, making any deviation from this norm an act of profound personal courage. Building on this, however, we must acknowledge the inherent limitations of even the most sophisticated intelligence operations. While the machinery of espionage aimed to sow discord and exploit weaknesses, it often overlooked the persistent underlying currents of human empathy. These currents, though often submerged beneath the surface of conflict, possessed a remarkable resilience. The very act of intelligence gathering, by its nature, involves close observation of individuals. This prolonged exposure, even in adversarial contexts, can sometimes lead to unexpected insights, revealing not just strategic vulnerabilities, but also glimpses of shared humanity that propaganda sought to obscure. Consequently, when a soldier like Klaus encountered the young American, his training screamed spy, yet his lived experience had provided him with a counter-narrative. He had seen the fear in the eyes of civilians caught in crossfire, the weariness etched on the faces of fellow soldiers, the universal language of suffering that transcended national boundaries. This internal dissonance, the conflict between ingrained suspicion and observed reality, created the fertile ground for a different kind of response. It wasn't a lapse in judgment, it was a conscious, albeit swift, reevaluation based on a broader, more nuanced understanding of human behavior. Furthermore, consider the subtle influence of personal ethics, those deeply ingrained moral codes that individuals carry with them, often formed long before the battlefield. For Klaus, the stories of his mother, tales of communal support and shared hardship, likely provided a foundational ethical framework that war could not entirely dismantle. These personal moral anchors can act as powerful counterweights against the dehumanizing pressures of conflict. They allow individuals to retain a sense of their own moral agency, even within a system that demands obedience and conformity. Now, reflect on how this might manifest in a different scenario. A captured soldier, malnourished and near death, is tended to by a medic from the opposing side. The medic's professional duty is to save lives, regardless of allegiance. However, the deeper motivation might stem from a personal abhorrence of needless suffering, a belief that all life holds intrinsic value. This is not merely adherence to protocol, it is a manifestation of a deeply held ethical principle that transcends the immediate conflict. The medic, in essence, is performing a quiet act of defiance against the war's directive to view the other as disposable. Conversely, the effectiveness of espionage often relies on the assumption that individuals will act solely out of self-interest or nationalistic fervor. It overlooks the profound human need for connection and the capacity for altruism that can emerge even under extreme duress. The very act of offering a simple gesture, like sharing food, can disrupt this calculated assumption. It introduces an element of unpredictability, a deviation from the expected behavior that intelligence analysts might fail to anticipate. This unpredictability is precisely what makes these acts of empathy so powerful, and in their own way, so strategically significant in challenging the narrative of perpetual enmity. The enduring power of these quiet acts lies in their ability to expose the fundamental human connection that war attempts to sever. The strategic deployment of misinformation during wartime extended beyond the battlefield, permeating civilian life and shaping public perception with chilling efficacy. Governments on all sides understood the critical importance of controlling the narrative, of molding public opinion into a unified force behind the war effort. This involved not only glorifying one's own side, but also systematically demonizing the adversary, stripping them of any relatable human qualities. The objective was to create an unbridgeable chasm of animosity, ensuring that any deviation from this hostile stance would be viewed with profound suspicion. Consequently, acts of compassion towards the enemy, when they occurred, were not merely personal moral choices. They represented a quiet yet potent defiance of this carefully constructed psychological warfare. Furthermore, the very nature of intelligence operations, while designed to exploit vulnerabilities, often inadvertently created opportunities for human connection. The meticulous observation required to gather information meant that intelligence officers and soldiers on the ground sometimes witnessed the daily lives of their adversaries. They saw not just potential threats, but individuals grappling with fear, loss, and the mundane realities of survival. This exposure, even through the detached lens of intelligence gathering, could chip away at the hardened perceptions fostered by propaganda. It introduced a level of complexity that often contradicted the simplistic black-and-white portrayals disseminated by official channels. Consider the operational imperative for clandestine communication. In situations where communication channels were compromised or non-existent, desperate measures were sometimes employed. A soldier tasked with delivering a crucial message might find themselves in a precarious position, relying on the goodwill of individuals from the opposing side to navigate dangerous territory. In such instances, a shared understanding of the immediate peril, a mutual desire to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, could override official animosity. A whispered direction, a deliberately overlooked patrol, a shared moment of silence during a lull in fighting. These were not acts of surrender, but pragmatic acknowledgments of a shared predicament. Such interactions, born from necessity, often revealed a surprising degree of pragmatism and even a grudging respect that existed beneath the surface of overt hostility. Conversely, the psychological impact on the perpetrator of such kindness is often profound and long-lasting. For Klaus, the act of sharing rice was not simply a fleeting moment of empathy. It was a reassertion of his own moral compass in an environment designed to erode it. This internal validation served as a bulwark against the dehumanizing aspects of war. It provided a sense of agency, a reminder that even within the rigid structure of military command, individual conscience could still hold sway. This internal victory, though secret and unacknowledged by the wider world, was crucial for maintaining psychological equilibrium and preventing complete moral corrosion. Another crucial layer to consider is the role of unexpected proximity. War, by its very nature, thrusts individuals into close, often unavoidable contact with their adversaries. This forced intimacy, while frequently leading to conflict, could also, paradoxically, foster moments of shared experience. Imagine soldiers from opposing sides taking shelter in the same bombed-out building during an artillery barrage, the shared fear creating a temporary, unspoken truce. In these moments, the stark reality of their shared vulnerability could eclipse the ideological divisions that fueled the conflict, leading to fleeting instances of mutual recognition and even, in rare cases, shared humanity. These brief interludes, though transient, underscored the artificiality of the animosity that the war sought to perpetuate. The intricate tapestry of wartime intelligence often revealed unexpected threads of human behavior, far removed from the calculated machinations of espionage. While intelligence agencies meticulously analyzed enemy troop movements, communication patterns, and logistical capabilities, they frequently underestimated the pervasive influence of individual conscience. The very act of close observation, a cornerstone of intelligence gathering, could paradoxically expose the shared vulnerabilities that propaganda sought to erase. Soldiers, even those operating under strict orders to gather information, were not automatons. They were individuals who, through prolonged exposure to the realities of conflict, could witness firsthand the profound impact of war on ordinary lives. This first-hand observation could, in turn, sow seeds of doubt about the simplistic narratives of absolute enmity. Consider the psychological phenomenon of moral disengagement, a process by which individuals can justify harmful actions by dehumanizing their victims or distancing themselves from the consequences of their behavior. During wartime, this disengagement is often actively encouraged through propaganda and military doctrine. However, it is not an impenetrable shield. Moments of direct, unmediated human interaction can create cracks in this armor. When an intelligence operative, for instance, witnesses an enemy soldier sharing their last meager rations with a starving civilian, or risking their own safety to rescue a downed pilot from the opposing side, the carefully constructed edifice of dehumanization begins to crumble. Such observations challenge the fundamental premise that the enemy is inherently devoid of compassion or moral grounding. Furthermore, the operational reality of intelligence work often necessitates a degree of interaction with local populations, even in occupied territories. This interaction, whether through coercion or clandestine recruitment, can expose intelligence operatives to the everyday struggles and resilience of civilians caught in the crossfire. These encounters, however transactional they may initially be, can foster a more nuanced understanding of the enemy population. The operative might witness acts of quiet resistance, expressions of hope, or simple acts of neighborly kindness that contradict the monolithic portrayal of a populace uniformly hostile or complicit. Such observations can lead to a more complex and ultimately more human perception of those on the other side of the conflict. Building on this, however, The very nature of clandestine operations can create a peculiar form of shared experience. Operatives on both sides, engaged in a dangerous game of cat and mouse, operate under similar pressures of secrecy, risk, and the constant threat of discovery. This shared operational context, while adversarial, can foster a grudging, unspoken understanding. Imagine a scenario where an operative deep behind enemy lines is forced to seek shelter during a sudden, intense bombardment. If they happen upon an enemy operative in the same precarious situation, the immediate instinctual response might be one of mutual threat. Yet, the shared vulnerability to the indiscriminate forces of war can momentarily eclipse their adversarial roles, leading to a silent, temporary truce born from the primal urge for survival. This shared predicament, however brief, can humanize the adversary in a way that direct combat rarely does. Conversely, the long-term psychological effects of witnessing or participating in such acts of clandestine compassion can be profound. For an intelligence operative who perhaps facilitated the escape of an enemy civilian or overlooked a minor infraction by an adversary, the act might linger in their memory. It could serve as a personal counterpoint to the dehumanizing rhetoric of war, a quiet affirmation of their own moral compass. This internal validation, though often kept secret, can provide a vital psychological buffer against the corrosive effects of prolonged conflict, allowing individuals to retain a sense of their own humanity even amidst widespread brutality. The intelligence gathered might be the primary objective, but the unrecorded observations of human connection can leave an indelible mark on the observer. The psychological terrain of wartime intelligence operations often presented a paradox. The very act of observing the enemy closely, of dissecting their behaviors and communications, could inadvertently expose the shared vulnerabilities that fueled the conflict. While the objective was to identify weaknesses and exploit them, this intimate scrutiny sometimes revealed unexpected acts of altruism or profound displays of resilience that defied the simplistic enemy caricature. Intelligence analysts, poring over intercepted radio transmissions or observing troop movements, might stumble upon evidence of enemy soldiers sharing scarce medical supplies with wounded civilians, or demonstrating unexpected restraint in the face of provocation. These isolated incidents, though often dismissed as anomalies, could subtly challenge the prevailing narrative of absolute enmity, planting seeds of doubt about the inherent depravity of the opposing forces. Consider the concept of moral licensing in psychology, where performing a good deed can sometimes make an individual feel more justified in later acting less ethically. In the context of war, the inverse can also occur. Witnessing an act of compassion from an enemy, even a small one, might subconsciously license the observer to consider a reciprocal gesture. If an enemy soldier can exhibit kindness, then perhaps they are not entirely the monster they are portrayed to be. This psychological opening, however slight, can create a cognitive dissonance that makes it easier for an individual to consider acting outside the prescribed norms of hostility. It's akin to finding a single, vibrant flower pushing through scorched earth. It challenges the prevailing perception of utter devastation. Furthermore, the operational realities of intelligence work often blurred the lines between combatant and observer. Operatives tasked with clandestine reconnaissance might find themselves in prolonged periods of close proximity to enemy personnel, sometimes even relying on them for passage or information, albeit under duress or through deception. These enforced interactions, stripped of the overt aggression of direct combat, could foster a grudging, unspoken understanding. Imagine an operative, deep behind enemy lines, needing to evade a patrol. If they happen upon an enemy soldier also attempting to avoid detection by their own superiors, perhaps for a minor infraction, the shared predicament can momentarily override their adversarial roles. This brief, unspoken alliance, born from a mutual desire to avoid consequences, humanizes the adversary in a way that direct confrontation rarely achieves. Conversely, the long-term psychological impact of witnessing or participating in these clandestine acts of inter-enemy kindness can be profound. For an operative who, perhaps facilitated the escape of an enemy civilian or overlooked a critical piece of intelligence due to a moment of empathy, the memory can serve as a vital internal counterpoint to the dehumanizing pressures of war. This personal acknowledgement of shared humanity, though often kept secret and unrecorded in official reports, can act as a crucial psychological buffer. It provides a sense of moral agency and personal integrity, a reminder that even within the rigid, often brutal structures of wartime operations, individual conscience can retain its significance. This internal validation is essential for maintaining psychological equilibrium and preventing the complete erosion of one's moral compass. The pervasive influence of wartime propaganda often created a psychological fortress, designed to insulate soldiers from any perception of shared humanity with the enemy. This fortress was meticulously constructed through the constant dissemination of dehumanizing narratives, portraying the adversary as inherently cruel, irrational, and devoid of any redeeming qualities. The objective was to foster an unshakable conviction that the enemy was not merely an opponent, but an existential threat, an entity fundamentally alien and deserving only of eradication. Consequently, any act that deviated from this prescribed animosity, any flicker of empathy, was not just discouraged, but actively punished, reinforcing the psychological barriers that separated the combatants. However, the very nature of clandestine operations, particularly those involving deep penetration or long-term observation, created unforeseen opportunities for nuanced understanding. Intelligence operatives, tasked with meticulously documenting enemy activities, often found themselves privy to the mundane realities of their adversaries' lives. They observed not just strategic deployments but also moments of quiet camaraderie, instances of soldiers tending to their personal effects, or expressions of longing for home. These glimpses into the everyday human experiences of the enemy, though filtered through the lens of intelligence gathering, could subtly erode the effectiveness of dehumanizing propaganda. It became increasingly difficult to maintain the conviction that an entire populace was uniformly monstrous when confronted with evidence of shared human concerns and vulnerabilities. Consider the psychological principle of cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort experienced when holding two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values. When an intelligence operative witnesses an enemy soldier performing an act of unexpected kindness, perhaps sharing scarce resources with a civilian or showing concern for a wounded comrade, this creates a significant dissonance. The observed behavior directly contradicts the ingrained belief that the enemy is solely driven by malice. This internal conflict can prompt a reevaluation of perceptions, leading to a more complex and less polarized view of the adversary. The operative might begin to question the totality of the propaganda, recognizing that reality is often far more nuanced than the simplified narratives presented to them. Furthermore, the operational necessity of establishing clandestine contacts within enemy territory often required a degree of pragmatic interaction that transcended overt hostility. Intelligence networks, by their very design, relied on individuals who could navigate the complex social dynamics of occupied or contested areas. This could involve recruiting local informants who, while operating under duress or for personal gain, might also possess their own moral compasses. The operatives tasked with managing these networks could witness firsthand the difficult choices individuals made to survive, including acts of mutual aid that extended across perceived lines of division. These interactions, though often transactional, could reveal a surprising degree of pragmatic cooperation and even a shared desire to mitigate the brutalizing effects of the conflict. Now imagine the perspective of a soldier on the front lines who, during a lull in fighting, observes an enemy combatant tending to a wounded civilian. The soldier's training dictates immediate hostility, viewing any enemy presence as a threat. Yet the observed act of care, a clear deviation from expected behavior, introduces a profound cognitive challenge. The soldier might grapple with the inherent contradiction: the enemy is supposed to be a ruthless killer, yet here is evidence of compassion. This internal struggle, this clash between ingrained prejudice and observed reality, can be a powerful catalyst for questioning the absolute nature of the enemy's supposed depravity. It forces a moment of introspection, a potential reevaluation of the simplistic us versus them mentality that war so effectively enforces. The intelligence gathered from such observations, though not always explicitly recorded, can nonetheless have a significant impact on the operatives' or soldiers' internal landscape, subtly altering their perception of the conflict and their place within it. The clandestine world of wartime intelligence often operated on the fringes of conventional morality, a realm where deception was a primary tool and trust was a rare commodity. Yet even within this shadowy domain, the persistent echoes of human decency could surface, often in ways that defied the strategic objectives of espionage. Consider the psychological phenomenon of moral licensing in its more subtle wartime application. It wasn't merely about feeling justified in later transgressions after performing a good deed. Rather, it involved the subconscious recalibration of one's own ethical boundaries when confronted with unexpected acts of enemy humanity. When an intelligence operative, tasked with observing enemy movements, witnessed a German soldier risking severe punishment to offer a stolen apple to a starving Polish child, the operative's internal calculus shifted. The enemy was no longer a faceless abstraction of evil, but an individual capable of a deeply human, albeit forbidden, act of generosity. This observation, logged perhaps as an insignificant detail in a larger report, could nonetheless erode the operative's own conviction in the absolute depravity of the opposing side, creating a subtle, internal shift in their perception of the conflict's moral landscape. Furthermore, the very operational demands of intelligence gathering could inadvertently foster a degree of unintended empathy. Operatives tasked with long-term surveillance, often embedded within enemy territory or observing from close proximity, were compelled to study the routines, habits, and even the personal lives of their targets. This prolonged, intimate observation, even when conducted with the detached objectivity required for intelligence analysis, could lead to a gradual humanization of the observed. Imagine an operative meticulously documenting the daily schedule of a particular enemy officer, only to notice a consistent pattern of that officer visiting a local orphanage during his off hours, not as a show of force, but as a genuine act of paternal care. While the officer's military actions remained a strategic concern, this repeated observation of his personal humanity could introduce a level of complexity that defied simple categorization as an enemy to be neutralized. It fostered a more nuanced, less polarized understanding of the adversary. Building on this, however, the practicalities of clandestine operations sometimes necessitated a pragmatic, albeit temporary, suspension of outright hostility. Consider the scenario where an intelligence operative, deep behind enemy lines, finds their escape route compromised by unforeseen circumstances, perhaps a sudden shift in enemy patrols. In such a desperate situation, they might encounter an enemy soldier who is equally out of position, perhaps AWOL or evading their own superiors. The immediate, instinctual response would be one of mutual threat. Yet, the shared predicament, the common vulnerability to capture by their own respective forces, could create a fleeting, unspoken understanding. A deliberately ignored patrol, a silently pointed direction away from danger, a shared moment of tense silence as a superior officer passes by. These were not acts of betrayal, but pragmatic acknowledgments of a shared, immediate peril. These moments, born from necessity, could reveal a surprising degree of mutual recognition that transcended the official animosity. Conversely, the psychological impact on the operative engaging in such clandestine acts of mutual recognition or understated empathy could be significant and enduring. For an operative who perhaps facilitated the temporary evasion of an enemy soldier or overlooked a minor intelligence detail due to a moment of shared humanity, the memory could serve as a crucial internal counterweight to the dehumanizing aspects of their mission. This personal acknowledgement of a shared human experience, often unrecorded in official debriefings, could provide a vital psychological buffer against the corrosive effects of prolonged conflict. It allowed individuals to retain a sense of their own moral agency and personal integrity, preventing the complete erosion of their ethical compass. Such acts, while seemingly insignificant in the grand scheme of wartime strategy, were crucial for maintaining psychological equilibrium and affirming the persistent, albeit often hidden, capacity for compassion within the human spirit. The operational exigencies of wartime intelligence frequently necessitated a delicate dance on the precipice of ethical compromise, a reality that intelligence operatives were compelled to navigate daily. Their mission often involved cultivating sources within enemy territory, a process that required not only strategic acumen, but also a nuanced understanding of human motivations. While the primary objective was to extract actionable intelligence, the very act of establishing and maintaining these clandestine networks sometimes exposed operatives to the complex realities of civilian life under occupation. Consider, for instance, the intelligence gathered on the clandestine distribution of food and medicine by civilian resistance groups in occupied France. Operatives might meticulously document the routes, the schedules, and the individuals involved, initially viewing these activities solely through the lens of potential enemy support networks. However, deeper analysis, or perhaps a prolonged period of observation, could reveal a different narrative. The intelligence reports might begin to include details about the desperation of the recipients, starving children, infirm elders, and the profound personal risks undertaken by those distributing aid. This data, while ostensibly serving strategic purposes, could inadvertently paint a picture of shared suffering and mutual support that transcended national allegiances. The operative, tasked with reporting on enemy activities, might find themselves documenting acts that were not strategically advantageous for the enemy war effort, but were instead deeply human responses to profound hardship. This juxtaposition of strategic reporting with observed humanitarian acts could create a subtle but significant dissonance, challenging the monolithic portrayal of the enemy as solely driven by malice or strategic advantage. The true significance of these echoes lies not in their power to end wars, for history shows us that such moments rarely achieve that grand objective. Instead, their power lies in their ability to survive them. They are the quiet affirmations that even in the darkest trenches, someone shared their light. They are the seeds of reconciliation, the unspoken understanding that beneath the animosity, a shared humanity persists. As the world continues to grapple with division and conflict, these historical moments offer a vital perspective. They do not offer easy answers, but a profound encouragement. That the capacity for empathy, for compassion, for recognizing the child in the enemy is not a forgotten casualty of war, but a living legacy. The true practice begins now, in acknowledging these persistent echoes, and in choosing, in our own lives, to nurture the light that war could not